Look at that. Our friends are here. Welcome to Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Jim the Nerd, and I swear I'm joined by Professor Aubrey. And we are continuing Education Month here by discussing stress because at the end of the day, stress isn't the enemy. Unmanaged stress is. Now, as mentioned, we are going to be talking about something every single person listening to has experienced at some point: stress. Some of you might be stressed because of work, some because of money, some because of school. And this is the time of year, of course, to think about that type of stuff. Some because you're raising kids, some because you have aging parents, some because life just keeps throwing things at you and it won't stop. Here's the interesting part, though: stress isn't always bad. In fact, sometimes stress is exactly what helps us succeed. Think about it. Athletes need a certain amount of pressure before a big game. Musicians often perform better when the audience is there. Imagine that. Students can become more focused right before an exam, even podcasters. Now, I don't know about you, but I always feel a little adrenaline before we hit record. Because if I didn't care, I probably wouldn't feel nervous. So today's question is this: why can stress help us perform one day and completely overwhelm us the next? Because I don't think stress is actually the problem here. I think it's how much stress we experience, how long we experience it, and whether we recover afterwards. Now, when someone asks you, "I'm just so stressed," what do you think they're usually trying to tell us?
I think when somebody says, "I'm just so stressed," they're often saying, "There are actually 47 tabs open in my brain. 3 of them are playing music, and I can't find the one that's making the noise." And yes, sometimes they really are just overwhelmed with their workload. But I'm stressed can also mean I'm scared or overwhelmed or I don't know what's going to happen. Everyone wants something from me, and I would like to have a small cabin in the woods and become unavailable to society. Stress is often the socially acceptable label we put on a whole bunch of more complicated emotions. And sometimes when someone tells you they're stressed, they're not actually asking you, "Can you handle the problem that's making me stressed?" They just want you to see that they're dealing with a lot. So instead of immediately giving some solution, like, "Did you make a list of pros and cons?" Which is usually actually the wrong thing to say to any stressed person. So instead, you might say something like, "Yeah, that sounds like a lot. What part is it that is making your brain scream the loudest?" Because sometimes people don't need you to solve their entire life. They just need someone to sit beside them while they locate the metaphorical fire extinguisher.
Now, one thing I noticed while researching this episode: people use the word stress to describe almost everything. I'm stressed because I have too much work. I'm stressed because I have nothing to do. I'm stressed because my vacation is tomorrow. I'm stressed because my favorite team is in the playoffs. Clearly, those aren't all the same experience. Now, psychologically speaking, stress isn't an emotion. It's our body's response to demands placed upon us. Sometimes those demands are physical, sometimes emotional, sometimes social, sometimes they're completely imagined. What's fascinating is that our bodies often react the same way, whether we're facing a real danger or just imagining the worst possible outcome. Is that why somebody can feel physically exhausted after worrying all day, even if nothing bad actually happened?
Yep, that's the stress response, which is your body's alarm system. Your heart rate goes up, your muscles get tense, cortisol is flowing, you're ready for action. And that takes energy, a lot of it. Anticipatory anxiety is when you're essentially suffering in advance. Nothing has happened yet, but your nervous system has already bought the ticket, packed the suitcase, and is waiting at the airport. So, yes, you can absolutely be exhausted from a day in which technically nothing happened. Your body may have spent 8 hours preparing for the apocalypse, and then you're surprised you're tired afterward. I can think of times when I was so worried about some things that I could do little bit work and sleep because I spent the whole day catastrophizing. So tense. I happened to be at the dentist today for a cleaning, and they asked me if I grind my teeth. Yeah. So, there are real health impacts of stress. And, we're going to talk about many ways in which stress is a good thing, but only in the correct dosage.
Because our stress response evolved to keep us alive. If our ancestors suddenly encountered a predator, like Annie or Mimsy,
That's right. Predators. Ah.
I'm ferocious. Their brains needed to make a decision almost instantly: fight, run, hide, or shit yourself. That system is still with us today. The problem is our brains sometimes react to an overflowing inbox or pants the same way they once reacted to a hungry tiger. Your brain can't always tell the difference between danger and perceived danger.
Exactly. Your brain is basically running prehistoric software on modern hardware. A tiger? Excellent. Stress response. Good thing to be stressed out about. An email that says, "Can we circle back?" apparently is also a tiger. That's because stress response is designed to protect us from immediate threats. Your brain detects danger, or what it interprets as danger, and mobilizes your body to deal with it. The problem is, modern threats usually don't require us to fight, flee, or hide. You can't exactly punch your inbox. I have tried. So instead, your body stays activated while you sit there answering emails, worrying about tomorrow, and wondering why your shoulders are somewhere around your ears. Your ancestors had tigers, and we have email. And honestly, I'm not sure who got the better deal. I think it was the one with the tigers because there are far fewer tigers than there are emails.
Yes, and if you kill a tiger, you at least have the fur you can use to make a coat. You can have, I'm sure the muscles probably nice and lean, so you probably want to eat too much of it.
It's ridiculous. Sometimes I think about Jane Austen's house where I've been and her seeing her archives and stuff. Is every single letter she ever wrote has been read by, hundreds of thousands of people. And you wonder about people's email that we're sending back and forth our emails and stuff. Maybe someday, for some reason, somebody's going to try to make sense of what we were doing by looking at our emails. And that's going to be a terrible job to do because there's so much email.
Indeed. Indeed. Now, I almost wonder if that's why modern life feels so exhausting. Our ancestors probably experienced intense stress followed by recovery. Today, many of us experience moderate stress all day, every day. Do you think people underestimate how important recovery is?
Oh, absolutely. I think we somehow decided that being exhausted is a character trait. We understand muscles need recovery after exercise, but when it comes to our brains and nervous systems, we act like, nope, nope, just keep going. Recovery is when your body gets a chance to come down from stress. Your heart rate settles, your muscles relax, and your nervous system gets out of emergency mode. And recovery doesn't necessarily mean lying on the couch doing nothing. It could be sleep, movement, laughter, being outside, talking to somebody you like, taking a nap while listening to wind chimes, um, or just 5 minutes where nobody needs anything from you. Because you can't run your internal emergency system 24/7 and expect it to remain an emergency system. It's going to be a worn out system that is going to be your personality. So, rest isn't what you do when you're done being productive. Rest is part of how you become productive again.
Productive again? Yeah, eat your heart out, Buck Owens. Now that brings us to one of the most famous stress hormones, one we've mentioned on Friends Talking Nerdy many times, cortisol. And I think cortisol gets blamed for a lot of things it probably doesn't deserve. Now, if you've spent any time online, you've probably seen headlines that say things like lower your cortisol or cortisol is destroying your health. But cortisol itself isn't bad. It's incredibly important. Without it, our bodies couldn't respond effectively to challenges. It helps regulate energy, it influences metabolism, it helps coordinate the body's response during stressful situations. The problem isn't cortisol. The problem is when our stress response stays activated far longer than it was designed to. Now, I wanted to ask you, would it be fair to compare cortisol to something like adrenaline, helpful in the right situation, but not something you'd want flooding your system all the time?
Yes. Although cortisol and adrenaline have slightly different jobs, that's a pretty good way of thinking about it. Adrenaline is the oh god tiger hormone, and cortisol is more like, okay, we have a problem, let's stay alert and keep the energy coming. Both are incredibly useful when you actually need them. Cortisol helps mobilize energy, regulate your immune system, and keep you functioning during stress. The problem is when stress doesn't really end. If your body keeps getting the message, we're still under threat, cortisol can stay elevated when you really need it to come back down. So the goal isn't to eliminate cortisol, we need it. The goal is to stop treating every Tuesday afternoon like a medical emergency. Cortisol isn't the villain, but it's the employee you don't want working overtime forever.
Taking all my money? Yeah. Now think about waking up late for work.
Ah.
Your heart starts racing, you move faster, you're more alert. That stress response actually helps you. But imagine feeling that way for weeks or months. Eventually, your body starts paying a price, which leads to something psychologists have known for well over a century. Too little pressure isn't ideal. Too much pressure isn't either. Now, this might be my favorite concept from today's research. Back in 1908, psychologists Robert Yerkes and John Dodson proposed something that's now known as the Yerkes-Dodson law. The basic idea is surprisingly simple. Performance tends to improve as stress or arousal increases up to a point. After that point, performance starts to decline. Imagine an upside down U. If you're barely awake, you're probably not doing your best work. If you're completely overwhelmed, you're probably not doing your best work either. Somewhere in the middle, that's where many people perform at their best. Now, when I ask, can you think of examples from your legal career where a healthy amount of pressure sharpened your thinking, but too much pressure would have made it harder to do your job well?
No, absolutely. Law is basically a controlled experiment in stress. It's so stressful. And, a little pressure before a trial, a deadline, or a difficult negotiation can really sharpen your attention. You're focused, you remember things, you know where important documents are, you remember names. You're able to function at a very high level. When you're doing that every day for years, it becomes a problem. When you're overwhelmed, your brain gets narrower so that you're not thinking creatively. You're just thinking, tell me what I have to do next. And that's really hard to do when you're a lawyer. You're the person who's coming up with what to do next. So it's very hard to be in a situation where you're so desperate with overwhelm that you just want someone to tell you what to do. So that's the paradox. Some stress can improve performance, but too much stress starts stealing the very mental resources you need to perform well. A little pressure can put you in the zone. Too much pressure makes you forget why you walked into the room. And, a great example from my life as an attorney was when I went to do my first United States Court of Appeals oral argument in front of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, who sits in Atlanta. And I was living in Kentucky at the time. And I had started working for an attorney doing environmental work about like 2 or 3 months before this event. And so my supervising attorney was like, we have this oral argument to do in Atlanta. There's no way we're winning the argument, so you can go make it.
No pressure.
No pressure, right? And so then no prep until the day we're driving. It must have been 10 hours from Kentucky to Atlanta. That's when we're doing the prep while I'm driving the car. And he is asking me questions and telling me what to say and then telling me what else to say. And I'm trying to drive the car. And it was incredibly stressful, and we did that all day, and then we arrived in Atlanta, it was about midnight, and then we really set to preparing, and I really needed sleep, and there was nothing I could do at that point except to say, "You know what? You're prepared. It sounds like you know exactly what to say, so you need to do this tomorrow because I'm not doing this tomorrow."
Which I'm sure probably wasn't the best career move necessarily, but it was the right move for you because they anticipated that that argument wasn't going to be won over by the judge anyway. So why not have the most prepared person do it to just get up there and do it and get it over with?
Yeah, I mean, I think for young attorneys, it's a great opportunity to do oral argument in front of a U.S. Court of Appeals. It's a great opportunity, but at the same time, it has to be done right. Like where I came from to that practice, we did moot court, we did all kinds of research, 6 people read your drafts, like we really prepared for things. And when that was more like fly by the seat of your pants, that made me have a
Panic attack.
panic attack, but it was a freeze kind of reaction.
And it does kind of go back to what we were talking about last week when we were talking about learning on the show and everything, because cramming at the last minute may pass you the test, but it's not necessarily going to be information that sticks around in your brain long term. And, cramming does have a romanticized element about it because everybody remembers the time to where they had 12 cups of coffee and stayed up and crammed for a test. And it's like a rite of passage if you're a student or, in this case, a lawyer or something like that. But again, not the best not the best way to actually learn the material because with doing oral arguments as a lawyer, you're not like doing a monologue from Henry VIII or something like that from Shakespeare. You're not
Right.
repeating already written lines or whatever. It's you got to take the information that you gathered for the case and then give your best potential argument to the judge in question. And cramming, not the best.
Not the best, but I think, going back to what is really stressful can be really useful, but too much stress interferes with whatever you're trying to do.
Indeed, indeed. Now, some everyday examples that people face in terms of stuff like stress and cortisol and all that stuff is students taking exams, which is something we want to think about during Education Month. Athletes before a competition, actors before opening night, doctors performing surgery,
Thank God.
teachers on the first day of school, parents trying to get 3 kids out the door by 8 o'clock. Almost every important part of life seems to have this sweet spot. Enough pressure to stay focused, not so much that we shut down. I actually find that encouraging because it means the goal isn't eliminating stress at all. The goal is learning how to manage it. Now, that's a much more realistic goal. Now, I want to ask, do you think that's one of the biggest misconceptions people have, that a healthy life should be a stress free life?
Yeah, I think we've confused healthy with nothing ever goes wrong. But stress is not a sign that you're doing it wrong. It is a normal biological response to change, challenge, and uncertainty. So the goal isn't and can't be a stress free life. It also sounds less like wellness and more like a coma. The goal is being able to move between activation and recovery so that you can handle stressful things and then come back down, re regulate your nervous system, get to a point of calm. Some stress is useful. It gets you out of bed, it helps you meet deadlines, and occasionally prevents you from making terrible decisions. But a healthy life isn't stress free. It's a life where stress doesn't get to move in and start paying rent. Although I wish it would.
Now, we've talked about why stress exists, why cortisol isn't the villain it's made out to be, and why a moderate amount of pressure can actually improve performance. But there's another side of this conversation that I think a lot of people have experienced firsthand. Why do two people walk into the same exact exam or job interview or courtroom and one person rises to the occasion while the other freezes? I think that's where psychology gets especially fascinating. Because next, I'd like to talk about test anxiety, workplace stress, and what happens when stress stops being temporary and gets real and becomes chronic.
Chronic.
Chronic. Now, one thing I really appreciate about the Yerkes Dotson law is that it reminds us that there isn't one perfect level of stress for everyone. What feels motivating to me might feel overwhelming to you, and what motivates me today might completely drain me tomorrow. Stress isn't just about what's happening around us, it's about what's happening inside us. Our experiences, our personalities, our confidence, our support system, even whether we got a good night's sleep. Now, I want to ask, do you think we sometimes underestimate just how personal stress really is?
Sure. Two people can experience the exact same situation and have completely different stress responses. One person gets a deadline and thinks, excellent, a challenge. Another person gets the same deadline and thinks, cool, I guess I live in a dumpster fire now. I'll talk about why I'm the latter kind of person. But stress isn't just about what happens to us. It's also about how we interpret it, what resources we have, how much control we feel we have, and what else is already happening in our lives. I think it's true that some people are optimistic and some people are pessimistic. And the optimistic ones really got the better end of the stick because they get to feel calm and happy instead of stressed out all the time because you can't ever recover because the stress is constantly coming at you. So there really isn't a universal like how much stress or how much stress is good stress. It's also personal to each person. And you got to look at the totality of the circumstances as we say in the law. That's why it sometimes annoys me when self-help or spiritual or metaphysical theories paint things as fitting into archetypes or categories or time periods, but things aren't always that cut and dry. You've got to look at the whole picture. And even then, we don't know exactly what someone's going to do because we also need to know the type of response that is elicited by stress. Tim, why don't you tell us about those responses that are elicited by stress?
Most people have heard of the fight or flight response, but psychologists now often talk about a third common response: freeze. Sometimes, when we're overwhelmed, our brains don't tell us to fight, they don't tell us to run, they tell us, don't move. Have you ever walked into a room and completely forgotten why you were there? Forgotten someone's name you've known for years? Opened your email, stared at it, and somehow couldn't decide which message to answer first? That's not laziness. Sometimes that's what cognitive overload looks like. Now, which begs the question: why do you think so many people blame themselves when they're actually experiencing a normal stress response?
I think because we've turned stress into a moral judgment. We say, I'm not handling this well, instead of my nervous system is responding to a lot right now. And there's a weird cultural expectation that competent adults should be able to calmly handle absolutely everything, which is frankly adorable. A stress response doesn't mean you're weak, dramatic, or bad at life. It means your brain and body are doing exactly what they're evolved to do. Sometimes the problem isn't that you're failing to cope, it's just that you're carrying too much. Stress is a biological response, not a character flaw.
Now, one thing that surprised me while researching this episode is that stress doesn't necessarily make us less intelligent. It often makes it harder to access what we already know. Now, think about those moments when you're driving home and suddenly can't remember your own phone number. You know it. It's been your number for years, but under enough pressure, your brain suddenly can't retrieve it. That can happen with facts during an exam, or words during a presentation, or even names during a conversation. Stress doesn't erase knowledge. Sometimes it temporarily blocks access to it. And that really changed how I think about people who freeze. Instead of assuming they weren't prepared, maybe they were carrying more pressure than we realized. Which makes me think of that time where Stewie played the electric socket in the Terry Schiavo musical on Family Guy, and then he got up on stage ready to sing, and then he froze, and then he cried, and then he peed his pants.
Oh, so sad.
Yes. Which makes me want to ask here, do you think our culture is getting better at recognizing the difference between inability and overload, or do we still tend to judge the outcome without asking what someone was carrying?
Oh, I think absolutely we still judge the outcome. When I'm at work, my superiors don't care if I worked real hard, if I don't get the work done. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not about the effort, it's about the outcome.
Hmm.
And, there are two sides to that. The other being, well, if I can create the outcome that you're looking for and it doesn't take me very long, then you should pay me the same amount you would pay somebody that it would take 40 hours to do the same thing. But that's not how it works. There are benefits and detriments to that. But I think we're getting better at talking about it, but we're still pretty quick to judge the outcome. So, we can recognize that there might be something going on internally. We see someone miss a deadline, lose their temper, shut down, or drop the ball, and our first question is often, what's wrong with them? Instead of, what are they carrying? And that distinction matters. Inability is, I don't have the capacity or skill to do this. Overload is, I might normally be able to do this, but right now I've got 17 other things sitting on top of me. Same behavior, very different story. And understanding that doesn't mean there are no consequences. It just means we're curious about the circumstances before we turn somebody's worst moment into a personality diagnosis. Before we judge what someone drops, maybe we should ask how much they were carrying.
Now, one place almost everyone experiences this is school, which makes sense since Education Month is what inspired today's episode. I remember being in school and hearing teachers say, just relax. And every student listening thought, if I knew how to relax, I wouldn't be anxious in the first place, asshole. Test Test anxiety isn't simply worrying about getting a question wrong. Sometimes it's worrying about disappointing parents, losing a scholarship, failing a class, embarrassing yourself, or believing one test somehow determines your future. That's an incredible amount of emotional weight to place on a single moment. Now, do you think education has gradually become more aware of the psychological side of learning than it was when we were kids?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's night and day. When we were kids, the educational philosophy was basically here's the assignment, figure it out, and stop crying. We understand a lot more now about the psychological side of learning, and some people care. We have school counselors, mental health resources, test accommodations, and much more awareness that anxiety, stress, trauma, and learning differences can affect how well somebody can actually learn. There's also the idea of a growth mindset, the belief that ability isn't fixed and that skills can develop with practice, feedback, and persistence. That said, we're not exactly living in an educational utopia. Students are still stressed, resources are very uneven, and sometimes we're asking kids to learn about managing stress while giving them 47 things to be stressed out about. And this is, it's a constant complaint of people I know who have children is that their children don't have time to just do stuff like we did when we were kids. It felt like we had tons of time just to do stupid bullshit that we wanted to do. And it feels like today kids are expected to be involved in so many things and getting good grades and being able to get in college. They're thinking when they're sophomores in high school, like it's just a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. And then people wonder why, kids do bad things.
Because we've gotten better at asking, can the student learn? Now we're learning to ask, what does the student need in order to learn? Now, one thing I wish every student understood is that a bad test score measures your performance on that test. It doesn't measure your worth as a person, it doesn't define your intelligence, it doesn't determine your potential, and that's easy to say as adults. It's just much harder to believe when you're 16. The fact is, yes, if you failed a math test in 10th grade, it is not going to prevent you from getting into Harvard. You're not going to lose a job because you didn't get good grades in algebra in ninth grade. Maybe one of the greatest gifts a teacher can give a student is helping them separate failure from identity. Instead of saying, I failed, therefore I am a failure, learn to say, I struggled this time. Now, what can I learn from it? Which is the more realistic option if you think about it. Because even though a student may only have a finite amount of time in class, in school to be able to learn this type of stuff in the job world, the everyday job world, you are going to have plenty of times to where you mess up and then you have to learn from your mistake and then you know, hopefully do better the next time. Now, granted, of course, if you keep on screwing up, then yeah, don't expect to have a job. That is a realistic expectation if you don't, if you continuously mess up or anything like that. But that is an everyday part of life. And I think at school, it seems, especially when you're younger and want to do good in school, people don't necessarily take that into account. Now, do you think that mindset becomes just as important in adulthood as it is in school?
This mindset of saying instead of saying I'm a failure, saying I struggled this time, so what can I learn from that? I think it's just as important in adulthood as it is in school, for sure. Maybe even more so in adulthood because the stakes feel so much higher. The stakes feel high when you're a kid that, Bobby's going to not like you the next day at school because you have on a color that Bobby doesn't like. That feels real high stakes when you're in sixth grade. As you become an adult, you realize, though, that that's nothing. That the stakes are quite low in that situation. Stakes can be much, much higher. If you're an adult, you might lose a job, make a mistake at work, screw up a relationship, make a bad decision, and suddenly your brain wants to turn one event into a biography. I failed at this becomes I'm a failure. That's really a destructive leap. A healthier response is, okay, that didn't work. What happened? What can I learn? What do I want to do differently next time? That doesn't mean pretending failure doesn't hurt. It means not making it your identity. Failure is an event, it's not a personality type.
Of course, school is only one place we experience stress. Most adults spend far more time worrying about work than they ever did about algebra. And it's interesting, people often assume workplace stress comes from having too much to do. And sometimes that's true. But research suggests stress can also come from a lack of control, not knowing what's expected, feeling unsupported, unclear communication, lack of recognition, or constantly feeling like you're waiting for the next crisis. Sometimes uncertainty is more exhausting than hard work. Now, I want to ask, what do you think healthy workplaces understand about stress that unhealthy workplaces often miss?
Well, I think healthy workplaces understand that stress is inevitable, but chronic overload is not. And they give you tools to deal with stress. But, a busy week, that's fine. A big deadline, fine. Sometimes you need to work hard, that's fine. But if every week is a crisis, or every day, or every hour brings a new crisis, people aren't becoming more productive in response to that. They're becoming exhausted, resentful, and really good at staring at the clock. Healthy workplaces also understand that people need some control, reasonable expectations, recovery time, and the ability to say, I have too much on my plate without being treated like they're suddenly developed a character defect. Because stress isn't always an individual problem. Sometimes the workload is the problem. A healthy workplace doesn't ask, how can we make employees tolerate more stress? It asks, why are we creating so much of it?
Now, think about two jobs. One is physically demanding, but you have supportive coworkers and a manager who communicates well. The other job is physically easy, but every day feels unpredictable. For a lot of people, the second job ends up being far more stressful. People can often handle hard work. What wears them down is uncertainty without support. And that makes me wonder, how often do we ask people, how much work do you have? Instead of asking, how much support do you have? Those aren't the same question. Now, have you seen situations where simply improving communication dramatically reduced stress?
Oh, absolutely. I've seen that happen in workplaces and in education. Sometimes the work itself isn't the biggest source of stress. It's not knowing what's happening, what's expected, whether you're doing it right, or whether someone is going to suddenly move the goalposts. If you give people information, clear priorities, realistic expectations, and someone they can actually ask questions of, suddenly the same workload seems much more manageable. That's because uncertainty makes your brain work overtime trying to fill in the blanks. Are we okay? Did I screw something up? Is this changing tomorrow? That's exhausting. And I think that's why how much work do you have is only half the question. The other is how supported are you while you're doing it? Sometimes the most stressful part of the job isn't the workload, it's knowing what the hell's going on.
Damn right. Now, so far, we've been talking about stress that comes and goes, a deadline, an exam, a trial, a presentation. But there's another kind of stress that's much harder on the human body, the kind that never seems to just switch off. This might be the biggest takeaway from today's conversation. Stress itself isn't necessarily unhealthy. Our bodies were designed to experience stress. What they weren't designed for is living in that state indefinitely. When stress becomes chronic, it can affect sleep, mood, concentration, relationships, decision making. And over time, it can contribute to a range of physical health problems. It's as though the body's alarm system keeps ringing even when there's no immediate emergency to respond to. Why do you think so many people normalize feeling overwhelmed all the time?
I think we've gotten really busy, really good at treating busy as a personality. So, like, if you're not busy, what are you doing? Everyone must be busy all the time. We all must be too busy all the time because if you're not too busy, you're lazy and you're not doing it right. So, it's like we're competing for the gold medal and having too much shit to do. And there are real reasons for it. We're constantly connected. Technology makes it possible for work to follow us home and everywhere we go. And a lot of people are dealing with financial pressure, caregiving, whether it's kids or parents or both. But there's also this cultural message that if you're overwhelmed, you're important. That's why I like to say if I see somebody rushing around, I always say, "Oh, you're very busy and important," because that's the kind of attitude of people where they're like, it's me, it's me, it's me. I'm more important than everyone else," kind of thing. If your calendar is packed, right, you're successful. The problem is that your nervous system does not care whether your stress is socially impressive or not. It just knows that it's tired. Being overwhelmed is not proof that you're doing a good job. Sometimes it's proof that you have too much on your plate.
And sometimes we even brag about it. I'm so busy. I only got 4 hours of sleep. I haven't taken a vacation in 3 years. We've almost turned burnout into a status symbol, but I don't think exhaustion should be confused with achievement. Being constantly overwhelmed isn't proof that you're succeeding. Sometimes it's a signal that something needs to change. When we started today's conversation, we asked why stress can help us one day and hurt us the next. I think we've discovered that stress itself isn't the deciding factor. Context matters, recovery matters, support matters, perspective matters. The same stress response that helps an athlete perform can become harmful if it never gets a chance to switch off. The same pressure that helps us meet a deadline can eventually wear us down if every day feels like an emergency. Now, I want to ask if someone listening today remembers only one idea from this entire conversation, what would you hope they take with them?
I think I want people to stop treating having stress like a personal failure. Stress is part of being human. The question isn't how do I eliminate stress? It's do I have enough recovery support and perspective to come back down? And if you're constantly overwhelmed, maybe the answer isn't that you need to become better at handling stress. Maybe you need less stress. You don't have to become better at surviving a life that is asking too much of you.
To quote Stone Cold Steve Austin, oh, hell yeah. For me, the biggest lesson is surprisingly hopeful. The goal isn't to eliminate stress, because that's impossible. The goal is to recognize when stress is helping us grow and when it's asking us to slow down, ask for support, or make a change, because those are two very different experiences. So maybe instead of asking, how do I get rid of stress, we should start asking, how do I manage it in a healthier way? I think that's a question worth carrying with us long after today's episode ends. And I think that is a good place to wrap it up here for the week. How about you? Any other thoughts on stress?
No, I think we pretty well covered it. We pretty well covered it tonight, I believe.
Damn right. Damn right. Now, before we wrap things up here, the day this episode comes out will put us 6 days away from the 9-year anniversary of Friends Talking Nerdy.
No way.
Yes, 9 years. I cannot believe it's been that long.
It's a long time, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah,
It was
because
just a baby show when I met you.
yeah, in the double digits at that
Yeah.
particular time. Like when I, first created it with the Reverend Tracy back in 2017, I did have hopes that it would last and last and last, but, you know, it was not anything that was like tangible in terms of, if I do X, Y, and Z, then we'll have, these results and anything like that. It was just this desire to keep on doing it. And I think what's kept it going for me in my head is to kind of treat it like, and I've used this analogy before many times. Treat it like a band. Like a local band that plays at a bar every Saturday. In our case, every Monday night, with occasional spot shows throughout the week or something like that. You do it for the love of it. You do it to take it seriously. You do it because you believe in it. And if someone comes along and happens to check out your work and thinks you can go on to do bigger and better things, even better. But that should not be the goal of what we do. The goal of what we do should be to get together and to have these conversations and to, hopefully do a little something good in the world too. And, more than anything, what I've appreciated too is just how much the show has evolved over the years.
Yeah, me too. Really, because when we met, I remember going back and listening to every episode, except when they were unlistenable, which was a couple of times where they were just like five dudes sitting around getting drunk kind of podcast.
That was just our 1 year anniversary episode. um, yeah, and I
And then I've been, so I'm aware of the podcast from the beginning to the end.
yes, and you've definitely been a major, major force in keeping this show going. Which, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for that and for all the work that you do each and every week for Friends Talking Nerdy. Now, do you have any favorite moments from the show?
From Friends Talking Nerdy,
Yes.
from the last 499 episodes.
No, no, we're not there yet. Episode 500, unless we miss a week, should drop on February 15th of 2027.
Oh, nice.
Yes, but we are up to 470 something right now. I forgot which one this episode will be here. But do you have a favorite moment from all the episodes you've been involved in?
Favorite moment? Gosh, there have been tons of really great moments. One certainly was the time that we reviewed the Esperanto album.
Episode 100, yeah.
Episode 100 is one of my favorites, looking back.
Why was that a favorite?
It was one of the most absurd things I'd ever experienced.
The whole album?
Yeah, the whole album. Like, it was just weird to learn of a whole different language that had been created by people to replace our language so that everyone could communicate in a universal language.
Gotcha. Anything else come to mind?
I don't know, remind me of some good ones. Like, I loved having Millie on the show, that was amazing.
Yeah, hopefully we can get her back soon talking about Spider-Man.
Yeah, man, Spider-Man.
Yeah, for me, I think the top for me was what we did in 2024 when we headed to Seattle.
Oh, uh-huh.
You know, that moment for me was cathartic in a lot of ways because we went to Seattle on the 30th anniversary of Kurt Cobain's passing, 30 years to the day. And I remembered exactly where I was 30 years beforehand, 17-year-old me in Grand Rapids, Michigan, when I heard the news, and being able to be there 30 years later to the day at the park next door where it happened, like it didn't solve any mystery for me, if that makes sense. But if anything, it was just like I needed to experience that. And I'm glad I got to experience that. And I'm glad we got to share that experience with our friends at home. The only thing I would do would be to, if I could go back and re-edit that episode, I'd probably cut off some of the playlist part, maybe even all of the playlist part, because sometimes I get it in my head, we're going to do this, and then we do, and it's like, that's not a good idea.
Yeah.
But, that's that.
Sort of like the pie in the face. That was a happy moment, was when you got the pie in the face.
Oh my
It
God.
was a happy moment when you had to watch the Princess Bride.
A happy moment for you.
Yeah.
Um, but the pie in the face, that was funny too, because before we recorded, we got the pie all prepared. It was like because it wasn't an actual pie, it was just like cooler frosting or something like that we put in a pie tin. And we had made the mistake of keeping that in the fridge.
Mhm.
So we kept it in the fridge and then took it out when we were ready to record, put it in the tin, and just had it next to me during the recording. And then by the time we're getting to the end, and I know I'm going to get it in my face, I turn and look down at it and see that it's like half watery at that point.
And you were like, "No!"
Yeah, at that point, I was like, yeah, maybe I don't want to do this. But, we ended up doing it. And, as a kid who grew up watching The Three Stooges and loving it, I can now go to my grave saying I took a pie to the face.
Yes, you sure did.
Yes.
Is there video proof of that?
I'm
Or video only?
well, as far as on the podcast feed, it is audio only. I'm sure I have the video stored somewhere. I'd have to go looking for it, but I'm sure it's there. It was not broadcast quality video or anything like that, but yeah, we've done a lot, and I'm excited about really the future of what this show has to offer. And I just hope that, our friends at home out there, if you are listening to this, tell your friends about this show, help spread the word.
Absolutely. We'd love to have more friends, more nerdy friends.
Yes, and more nerdy friends to even talk to as well. I mean, the fact that we got to talk to your friend Millie, like that's, a conversation that, when I first, created the show, I never thought, we'd be speaking to a psychologist of any sort. But look at that, we did, and it was quite the intelligent conversation.
Yeah. Sound
Coming
like grown-ups.
Yeah, coming from me. But anyway, anything as far as the future of the show you would like you hope happens?
Well, I hope that the body of our work will be noticed at some point, and the fact of how dedicated we are to it, and the passion that we have for it. I hope for the future that someone will recognize that.
I hope so too, but again, if that doesn't happen, if like I were to walk out of this house tomorrow and get hit by a bus,
No.
this is still one of the greatest creative endeavors I've ever had the privilege of helping get off the ground and, and continuing on. And, I hope we get to the 10-year mark. I hope we get to the 20-year mark, and all that too. But anyway, Mimsy here, as we record this, found herself a rubber band.
And she found it.
Annie found it, yeah. And that's been another thing, too, about Friends Talking Nerdy. We've had quite the journey with our animal friends throughout the years.
Yes, we really have.
Yeah, like Phil and Sherman were major parts of the early years of Friends Talking Nerdy. And of course, Annie and Mimsy, the current show mascots. And Mimsy, of course, loves hearing my voice, and she's lying on her belly, and Annie's looking at her like, Mama, I'm going to attack you in a minute because I'm a vicious predator. That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, and even some of the wildlife that we talk about, me talking about some of the dogs that I work with, animals are awesome.
They are. We love animals here at Friends Talking Nerdy.
Yes. Well, anything else you want to say to our friends at home before we wrap things up for another week?
I think that's it.
All right. Each week, we will have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
So long.
Now, I'm going to do my vicious predator work because I'm a predator. That's right. Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy
on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Bye, friends.